Welcome to Special Education 101, where we'll cover the legal and procedural requirements of IDEA. This includes the 6 principles of IDEA, your legal responsibilities as an educator, brief instructional recommendations, and procedural requirements. First, special education all stems from the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDEA. There are 6 foundational principles of the IDEA. First, free appropriate public education. The IDEA gives each eligible child with disabilities the right to a free appropriate public education. FAPE means that as a public school district, we will provide services at no cost to the parents that meet the standards from the State Department of Education. We are required to meet the individualized needs of each eligible child between the ages of 3 to 21 through a written Individualized Education Program, or IEP. Principle 2, the evaluation. IDEA mandates that each state has a process for identifying and evaluating children with disabilities, including evaluating children who are homeschooled or attend private school. This process is called Child Find. Evaluations by Child Find teams are at no cost to parents. There are many ways a child could be referred for an evaluation for special education, and just because a child is referred does not guarantee a child will be evaluated. The district will review all available existing information to determine if a disability is suspected. To evaluate a student, you must have permission from the legal guardian or educational decision maker of that student. IDEA requires that a student must receive an evaluation before providing special education services to determine first whether the student qualifies as a child with a disability according to the IDEA definitions, and two, to determine the educational needs of the student. The evaluation must include consideration for all of the areas in which a disability is suspected. You may be wondering how evaluations are used to determine if there is a disability, which qualifies under IDEA. To qualify for an IEP, a student must have an educational disability that impacts their progress in comparison to peers and requires specialized instruction to meet their educational needs. Additionally, the student must fall into certain categories and meet the requirements as outlined for those categories. These categories include a specific learning disability, other health impairment, autism spectrum disorder, emotional disturbance, speech or language disorder, visual impairment, hearing impairment, deaf blindness, orthopedic impairment, traumatic brain injury, or multiple disabilities. Principle 3, the IEP. The IEP is a working document, which means it can be revised through appropriate procedures as needed. It must be revised annually based on when the initial IEP was held. Each IEP must have certain components, and each IEP meeting must have certain people in attendance. Let's look at the parts of an IEP. First is a present level of academic achievement and functional performance. You may hear this referred to as the plot. This is a snapshot of who the child is and how they're currently performing. Parent input. This is the parent's opportunity to share insights about their child both academically and outside of the school. While it is specifically asked for during the present level, the parent should be afforded the opportunity to provide input throughout the entire document. Annual educational goals. These should be SMART goals, realistic, achievable, and measurable. Goals can be academic, behavioral, social, or transition based and should always be written for identified areas of need. FAPE, or the placement and services portion. FAPE is the public school district's offer of services and supports in the least restrictive environment that the child needs to reach the identified goals and how they'll be delivered. I need to highlight that special education is not a place. The goals and services should be designed without preset expectations for where the services will be provided. The educational program is determined first, the placement or educational setting is determined second. Accommodations and modifications. These are changes that help a child learn the general education curriculum. And lastly, transition plan. Students who will turn 15 must have a transition goal and plan to help prepare them for life after high school. The required attendees include parent or guardian of the child, special education teacher, general education teacher, a person who can interpret the instructional implications of test or evaluation data, and an LEA representative, which could be your building's process coordinator or administrator. Principle 4, least restrictive environment. While the word environment makes it sound like we're only focused on the physical location, it's actually much broader than this. It includes where the child will learn, who the child will learn with, etc. Least restrictive environment means the following points are adhered to. Any placement outside the general education classroom must be justified by the child's individual disability related needs. Students must have meaningful access to same age peers without disabilities when appropriate, and involvement in electives or exploratory classes must be accommodated, as well as the ability to participate in extracurricular activities or field trips. FYI, you can never require a parent to attend a field trip as a condition of the student being able to attend. Part of LRE is the responsibility of the district to offer a continuum of placement options for students with special needs. From least restrictive to most restrictive, the continuum of options includes regular education classroom, part regular and part special education classroom, often referred to as self contained, a separate public school, separate private school, separate residential school, hospital, and/or homebound instruction. Principle 5. Parent and student participation. IDEA requires parent involvement in the decision-making process and student involvement when appropriate, especially as students begin the transition process into their post-secondary life. Prior to the age of 15, students should be included to the extent possible. At 15, student participation in the IEP process is required. Parents and students should participate in the development and revision of the IEP, including educational placement decisions and during the evaluation process. The final principle 6, procedural safeguards. The procedural safeguards is the piece of IDEA that truly protects the parent and children with disabilities. There are three major components to the procedural safeguards, detailing what parents are entitled to. First, parents are entitled to notice in writing, including when IEP meetings are scheduled, whenever the school is proposing a change or refusing a change, and printed copies of the Parents' Bill of Rights and procedural safeguards. 2. Parents are entitled to access student records, which includes copies of the IEP, other records, and they can place a statement of correction or explanation if they disagree with something in the child's record. 3. Parents also have a variety of procedural protections they can invoke when they disagree with educators, like requesting a facilitated IEP or an IEP with mediation. They can even go as far as a written formal complaint or due process hearing. Let's look at our legal responsibilities for educators. First, you have the obligation of child find. If you suspect a child has a disability, you're required to make a referral. This can be referring a student to SST so the data collection process can begin. Even though a student may be going through the SST process or RTI, a referral for special education can be made. The RTI process and evaluation process can occur simultaneously. 2. IEP meetings. As a special education teacher, you're well aware you must be at your students' IEP meetings because you run them. General education teachers are also required to attend. If you know you're limited on time, you should express this at the beginning of the meeting and must have acknowledgement and agreement from the parent to excuse yourself early. Additionally, general education teachers should be knowledgeable about the student's academic or behavioral abilities in general education and be able to contribute to the conversation. 3. Evaluations. For an initial evaluation, a general education teacher's input is crucial in providing that meaningful feedback about the student's abilities in the classroom. For re-evaluations, both the special education teacher and the general education teacher are expected to provide this information. This should go simply beyond a no concerns and be proof of why there are no concerns in the area. For example, with the area of hearing, one could say student responds promptly when name is called, or for the area of adaptive, an adequate response would be student is able to move around the building or classroom independently. 4. Implementation of the IEP. General education teachers must fully understand their IEP obligations and provide each student with the identified services relevant to their obligations. General education teachers may not ignore or disregard their obligations pursuant to the IEP. Let's look at some instructional recommendations. There's not a one size fits all approach to special education, which is why students receive individualized plans. The best approach is strong tier 1 interventions in the general education classroom and support students with disabilities with the additional accommodations required by the IEP. This can include setting clear expectations for all students, breaking large assignments into smaller pieces with checkpoints, and have consistent routines and procedures for your classroom. Differentiation is key to inclusion. Differentiation does not have to be 3 levels of wildly different activities. It could be different levels of support during the same activity. It can be varying amounts of practice problems or varying levels of difficulty by selecting certain problems on a worksheet. Perhaps a student with a learning disability in math may do the even problems 2 through 10. An advanced student may be able to skip introductory problems and only do application or word problems. Finally, let's look at our procedural requirements. While there are many procedural requirements, one of the most daunting is that of timelines. Within 5 days of receiving a referral, the district must send a letter to the parent or guardian that the request has been received. Then, the district has 30 days to decide if a disability is suspected through a process called the Review of Existing Data, or RED. If a disability is suspected, the district has 60 days, calendar days, after getting parent permission to complete assessments relevant to the areas of concern and present the findings to the parent during an evaluation meeting. Then, within 30 days of the determination meeting, if the student qualifies under IDEA, there must be an IEP proposed by the district. Sometimes, if a student clearly meets criteria for a qualifying area under IDEA, a draft IEP could be proposed immediately following the evaluation report if the team agrees a disability exists and the parent is okay with it. From there, annual reviews of the IEP must be conducted and an evaluation with or without testing must be done. Data collection to support IEP goal progress should be collected regularly and is prescribed by the IEP by both general education and special education staff. Special education does not have to feel overwhelming. The IEP team is responsible for writing the how to guides for each student with disabilities in the form of that student's IEP. Follow the IEP as it's written and you'll be just fine. Thank you for watching Special Education 101. If you have any questions, you can contact the district special education department or your building's process coordinator or special education team.